Most of you watching this video already are familiar with the Monster Hunter series. Since its inception over 20 years ago, the franchise has continued to innovate and reinvent itself to keep its fans coming back for more, keeping them satisfied, and the content fresh. But even among all the different innovations that have come and gone in the series, none were as unique, impactful, and as divisive as the main gimmick of the third generation, underwater combat. But why was it so divisive? And why was it hated by the community? Let's embark on a journey to figure out what made the third generation so special, why underwater combat was so hated, how views have shifted, how Monster Hunter was never the same after this generation, and how underwater gameplay as a whole may find its way back into the franchise. A disclaimer: I will only be looking at Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, and not at Tri nor Portable Third. I will mention them, but they won't be the main point of this video. Real quick before the video continues, I have a special announcement to make. On the 22nd of February, the Monster Hunter community will hold its first ever Hunters Awards. It is a community-led event to honor the people who make it up and the game that we all love. Go check it out, we have some really cool stuff planned for you, and hey, you may even recognize my editing style. Alright, let's get on with the video. Monster Hunter is one of the very few game franchises universally beloved by its fanbase for reasons so very diverse, some people may have not even thought about loving the game for those very reasons. Be it the amazingly deep combat, the attention to detail in terms of monster design, the ecological aspect of the Monster Hunter universe, or something else entirely. There, are you happy now? I mentioned it now. However, many people forget that the series didn't start out the way it is now. In fact, the third generation was the first time the franchise was entirely reset. Top to bottom, everything was redone from the ground up. Monster designs were remodeled for the first time, a first attempt at 3D movement was implemented in the form of underwater areas, a very basic form of free hunts was added, new gear such as the charms and the switch axe were introduced, and so much more. These changes were made in order to not just spice up the formula, as the developers like to do with each new entry, but it was also in order to create a more tight and precise vision of what Monster Hunter was meant to be and meant to become. The areas were more populated with the first iteration of endemic life. Locales were now heavily inspired by real-world locations to make them feel more real, and monsters were redesigned to feel more alive, not just in the visual department, but also in their behaviors and movements. This meant new hitboxes, animations, as well as tighter and somewhat faster combat. And according to an interview with our Lord and Savior Ryozo Tsujimoto, 3 Ultimate also included the first iterations of monster herds that didn't simply exist together, but interacted with other monsters. See the dog wyvern such as Great Boggy. So as you may be able to see, a lot of the things that we love in modern Monster Hunter can trace their beginnings back to this generation, which makes 3 Ultimate a monumentally influential entry in the series, no matter how much Capcom wants us to forget that it existed. To illustrate how monumental this entry was, let's look at the Moga Woods. While the gameplay loop in the third generation was not too different from games that came before or after, the Moga Woods were a new key part of the loop that managed to alter the experience to a massive degree, as this new free hunt activity was tied to rare item trades and thus, by extension, to village requests, facility upgrades, and facility usage in the first place. Between your run-of-the-mill hunts, you would have to go to the Moga Woods to hunt monsters to gain exclusive trading items and Moga points to spend in the village facilities such as the farm or the fisherman's fleet. The woods would then of course go on to become the guild quests in 4 Ultimate, as well as the expeditions and investigations in World and Rise, each focusing on different aspects of what the woods first set out to do. Even the rare exclusive items were brought forth in the form of relic armor, streamstones, and anomaly items. And aside from that, you would go on quests, gather items, fish, and make new gear to hunt even bigger beasties. Although there's a major difference in terms of forging gear between the 5th gen games and any generation prior. The required items for gear would not just come from the monster the gear is from, nor would it be from maybe another monster. Depending on the gear piece, you may just have to hunt multiple different monsters, gather different ores, and at times, fish. These fish you would not just get by fishing, but at times also by going down there and punching the shit out of them. This task can prove to be somewhat of a struggle, as underwater movement has been called rather clunky even by Monster Hunter standards. And there certainly is some truth behind that, as underwater movement was tied to your camera placement. Wherever you look, your character would swim relative to. This would become problematic whenever your camera view was blocked by the monster literally getting in the way, forcing you to reposition your camera to even see where you're going, costing precious seconds. But that is not all. If it were just for the camera deciding where you go, most people would not have too much of an issue with it, but the character's extremely slow movement and turn speed made this a grueling task that can quite literally cost you a cart. Adding on to that, my directional evade inputs would more often than not be misinterpreted by the game, leading to me swimming straight up or straight down, even though I wanted to swim to the side. The problem was exacerbated even further by the fact that some weapons had a reduced moveset while underwater, which stemmed from a rocky development. This made underwater movements and combat feel exceptionally jarring at first, but I would argue that's just it. At first, to me this just felt like another layer of combat you needed to be aware of when deciding which weapon you wish to use in any given situation. Like, some weapons were more made for land-based combat and others for both. I myself gravitated heavily towards the gun lance this entire playthrough, as not only did the gun lance have some great movement options in the form of quick side dodges, but also a lunging attack that covers quite the distance and has excellent defense in the case of me not being able to dodge anymore. Not like I did that successfully often anyway. The monster roster for underwater combat was admittedly rather small. Out of the 51 large monsters present in 3 Ultimate, only 10 make use of the underwater aspect, of which nearly half are merely sub or rare species. But this does not mean that what is there is not enough to cover the entire game without ever feeling too redundant. Since the monsters were entirely remodeled and new tech was used to make monsters more intricate, the offering of loot boxes that fight back is truly at an all-time great. You had icons such as the Great Jagi, who somehow has a cult following, which I really need someone to explain to me, Kurupeko, the monster that answers the question, what if a monster was a younger sibling ratting you out to your parents? Lagiacrus, who won 2nd place in the popularity poll and is the vastly overrated alternative to Agnactor. Ceadeus, the only purely underwater monster ever with one of the best themes ever made in the franchise, and of course, 3 Ultimate's true flagship, Brachydios. A monster so over the top, Capcom not only had to nerf the slime element into oblivion, but also had to change Brachydios' explosive punches because they were literally undodgeable without evade extender. And another honorable mention is Mr. Pimpwalk himself, Zinogre. He wasn't introduced in 3 Ultimate, but rather in Purple 3rd, but the West never actually got that game. These monsters made the combat so varied it is genuinely insane. Brachydios would make the fight hectic and force you to be aggressive, as in a battle of attrition, Brachydios would eventually win. Lagiacrus would offer a more balanced experience, not only in terms of land and water-based combat, but also by changing up the combat speed, as Lagiacrus was more at home underwater, making him a menace in his home turf, but in turn, slower on land. Now, one would expect me to give you an example of a slow fight to round it all out, and I could, but instead let me show you my personal favorite brute wyvern, Duramboros. This mountain of a goat looks like it would be moving at the speed of a snail, but no, this guy uses his sheer girth to fling himself across the map and into the sky, or alternatively, his gigantic horns to dig up the soil while barreling towards you. This is what Banbaro wishes he could be. The 3rd generation also introduced the last 2 additions to the Black Dragon roster. Elatrion, the Blazing Black Dragon, and Dire Morales, the Molten Black Dragon. Elatrion was cool, don't get me wrong, but no one has as much sauce as Dire Morales. The sea he chills in is called the Tainted Sea. Why? Because not only is it now devoid of all life thanks to him boiling the hell out of it, but it is red thanks to the sheer amount of blood shed in this area. Fucker is standing in his own soup. It is so badass. Also, and this is just a nitpick from me and doesn't specifically just apply to the 3rd generation of Monster Hunter, but to every generation prior to 5th gen, but listen to this. And now, listen to this. These are both Rathalos roars, but the former is from World and the latter from insert pre-World Monster Hunter here. And it is not just the wraths that have this odd change in roar sounds. One of the most blatant changes is Zinogre. It feels as if the roars lost some of the oomph that they used to have in favor of more quote-unquote realistic ones. I'm not a fan of that, to be honest, since, I mean, would you rather have the more demonic sounding Zinogre roar or the more puppy tries to go awoo roar? Honestly, let me know in the comments. I would like to know, since I and some of my friends cannot agree on which is better. But before we move on to the next major topic, fuck Diablos. Let's talk about the development of 3rd generation from both the developer side and the sentiments of the community from back then. Monster Hunter was famously known back in the day as a primarily PlayStation game series, but due to the vast changes that the team had planned for Monster Hunter Tri, they opted to sign an exclusivity deal with Nintendo to get a larger injection of cash and allegedly a huge marketing push that PlayStation was unwilling to do themselves. The development of 3rd gen Monster Hunter was such a behemoth undertaking that Tri, the first game of the generation, only shipped with 18 large monsters and 7 of the 12 existing weapon types. The main reason for that being the implementation of underwater mechanics for both the hunter and the monsters. Kaname Fujioka, the game director of World and long-term member of the Monster Hunter team, stated in an interview with GameSpot once that for the amount of time and effort it takes to make underwater action work, we felt that in Monster Hunter World we were better off focusing on other things. Later also mentioning that he would like to try his hand at it again in the future, but having no concrete plans in place. Furthermore, former Monster Hunter Tri assistant producer Shintaro Kojima said that adding water-based battles to the already existing ground-based battles would be like having to make an entirely different game, which is likely the reason for some weapons having less moves underwater. And just in general, I recall there not being much positive chatter from the player side about underwater action either. As I mentioned before, people claimed that underwater combat was clunky even for Monster Hunter standards. Repositioning your camera was always a chore due to it constantly being blocked by foliage or monsters. In fact, underwater was so disliked by both the devs and the customers that the game after Tri, Portable 3rd, went entirely without underwater areas despite having some overlapping locales between them. 3 Ultimate continued with the underwater aspect, and the monster roster was bolstered to around 50 monsters, with underwater monsters getting some amazing additions, apart from Plesioth getting a green Grinch of a subspecies, and yet underwater combat was still disliked by most customers. Then there's also the issue of people finding out about the cursed charm tables. So, as you know, charms are a thing. And these charms used to be RNG prior to World. Now in 3 Ultimate there were, I think, around 17 separate charm tables, which you would be assigned to at the start of the game. These charm tables would restrict the possible skill combos on any given charm from around 20,000 to merely 800. And in addition to this extremely minuscule offering of charms, it would also be locked out of getting some fisherman items, locking you out of some armor pieces in turn. Nevertheless, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate was a commercial and critical success, and over the years, the diehard fans of underwater combat never ceased asking for it back, and those who never quite jived with it started to soften up on it, seeing the vision the developers intended and starting to see where the reintroduction of underwater areas could lead, the potential it could have. So much so that the cries for a return to the dark depths even reached Tokada during the Gamescom livestream of the public demo for Monster Hunter Wilds.
Maybe throw a bit of a, dampener on the chat excitement about underwater combat. It's not underwater combat. There's just a few areas you can traverse while diving underwater. So, sorry to disappoint you all, but you really wanted that much, huh?
And while that reaction is not the "yeah, you're getting in the goddamn water again" that we hoped for, at the very least it lets them know that yes, we do indeed want another go at taking a plunge. While ground-based locales are fine and still have a lot to give in terms of variety, not actually attempting to plunge into the oceans feels like a missed opportunity. Just look at the intro cutscene of 3 Ultimate. Look at how lush and vibrant this rendition of the deserted island's coastal area is. Just imagine actually being able to see this version of the biomes and not being limited by the hardware anymore. Just imagine. what could be done with the vast flora and fauna of the seas. Imagine Namiel actually being underwater and using its bioluminescent properties while just minding its own business, or seeing a gobo lure its prey in and feeding on Epioth or Gajau. And this may just be a hot take, but I personally don't think Lagiacrus would be even half as much fun to fight while being landlocked than it would be with its underwater aspect intact. Which is why I cannot stand Ivory Lagiacrus and absolutely adore Abyssal Lagiacrus. Let's take it a step further. Ryuzo Tsujimoto stated that the 3rd generation was the first introduction of herd monsters. Why not take that concept and extend it to creatures such as the Humboldt squid, who hunt in packs? We have squids in the game now, so why not? And if I remember correctly, Narcarcos, the cephalopod elder dragon from Generations, hunts juvenile sea deus, giving you some turf wars and monsters to implement right there. Underwater areas could even have their own forms of heat or cold effects in the form of brine pools that require you to carry a filter and would chip away your health if you didn't refresh it. Water biomes present an untapped spring of potential that is just waiting to be realized. And we do seem to be inching closer and closer to that with these new entries, as in World we were able to swim for area transitions. That wasn't much more than a small animation, but hey, my video, let me cope. Now with Wilds we have larger underwater corridors with items that can be gathered while submerged. Sure, you can't hunt in these corridors, and you're on rails the entire time, but it is more than before. I'm sure that this can be slowly expanded, going from on-the-rails sections to free exploration areas, still just for item gathering, and then maybe down the line, wider areas in which we could actually fight. Monster Hunter is no longer the niche franchise it used to be. It is now a global colossus of a franchise with millions of fans who not only buy the games and their respective expansions, but also engage in buying the microtransactions that are on offer. And as much as that last bit vexes me, this means that the developers are flush with money and have garnered a patient fanbase that is willing to wait and invested enough to keep the flames of excitement going on their own. If they wished to actually attempt another full-scale reintroduction of underwater combat, now is the time to do so. They are no longer limited by the technology, which, let's be honest, doesn't even matter, since they managed to make it work on the Wii, a console that was behind the times even back then. It wouldn't have to be a full-on working rollout within one development cycle either. They could iterate across multiple releases, adding more and more functionality to it with each new release. And I bet with you that people will be willing to wait. And before I end this video, let me talk about why this game specifically is so special to me. Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate was the game that made Monster Hunter fully click with me. While I began with Monster Hunter Freedom Unite and played that game for a good while, I never got past the initial few high ranks. I was extremely young back then and didn't quite understand the game yet, but I was hooked. Then one late evening, my fat ass was sitting on our couch, watching a little show called Game 1, a German gaming show on TV talking about gaming news, releases and reviews with some high-effort skits. And this specific episode debuted the first look at Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, which instantly made me do the meme. They also made hand puppets of monsters do the Harlem Shake, when that was still a thing. If that's still on YouTube, I will link it right now. If I have to see it, you have to see it as well. And yet again, I was hooked on the promise of being able to literally dive back into this world. And I specifically bought a 3DS to play this game. I even managed to get two of my friends to get the game as well. The three of us would play Monster Hunter day and night together, through weekends, school recesses, and so on and so forth. This was the game that I fully understood. I understood what mixed sets were. I understood how low rank differed from high rank and how brutal G rank was. I understood that Greatsword is a piece of shit, and I understood the wonder of the world of Monster Hunter. 3U is special to me for these reasons. And as much as it hurts to see the core feature that made me genuinely fully fall in love with this franchise being pushed to the wayside, it also makes me exceptionally proud to see the humble beginnings of everything we love about the franchise today still hold up after 13 years. Now, if you have reached the end of this video, first of all, thank you. Have you played any of the 3rd generation games, be it Tri, Portable 3rd, or 3 Ultimate? What did you think of them? And regardless of whether you have played any of these games, would you like underwater areas and combat to make a full return? Do you have any ideas specific to water-based action, like a monster or gimmick for the area or an area design? And if you don't want them to return at all, let me know in the comments below. I would love to discuss these ideas. Thank you all again for watching. I apologize for the long wait time between this video and the last one, and I'll see you in the next one.